Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Library. It's lovely to have you here. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? A quiet bedroom, a sleepy train ride, a cozy couch near a window overlooking a garden. Wherever you are, I hope you're comfortable, safe, and ready to gently drift into thought. If you enjoy these relaxing explorations and would like to hear more, a like and subscribe really helps this sleepy little channel float along. And to those of you already subscribed, thank you. Truly, your support means more than you know. Now, I'll try not to make tonight's topic so interesting that it keeps you wide awake. But if it does, at least you'll have a better understanding of why the quiet houseplant on your windowsill might be more aware than you ever imagined. A small price to pay for a restless night. So, let's begin, shall we? What if I told you that plants can learn? That they can remember experiences for weeks or even months? That they communicate with each other through underground networks, warn their neighbors about dangers, and even make decisions about where to grow and how to respond to threats. For most of human history, we thought of plants as simple, passive things. They grow toward the light, their roots reach down for water, and that's about it. Beautiful, yes. Essential to life, absolutely. But intelligent? That seemed like a stretch. A bit of wishful thinking, perhaps. But in the last few decades, scientists have been discovering something remarkable. Plants, it turns out, are doing far more than we ever imagined. They sense their surroundings in ways that seem almost impossible for organisms without eyes or ears or brains. They respond to touch, to sound, to the presence of their neighbors. They adjust their behavior based on past experiences. And they do all of this without a single neuron, without anything we would recognize as a nervous system. This isn't fantasy or folklore. This is science, careful science, conducted in laboratories and forests around the world by researchers who started out skeptical and ended up astonished. The world of plant intelligence is opening up before us like a flower in morning light. And what we're discovering is changing the way we think about consciousness, about awareness, and about what it means to be alive. So, tuck yourself in, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's wander gently through this green world. We'll meet plants that count, plants that remember, plants that talk to each other in chemical whispers. We'll explore underground networks that connect entire forests. And we'll discover that the boundary between thinking and not thinking might be far softer than we ever believed. Let's begin. Imagine reaching out and gently brushing your finger across a leaf of a plant called Mimosa pudica. The moment you make contact, something extraordinary happens. The leaflets fold inward, as if the plant is shy, as if it's retreating from your touch. Within seconds, the entire leaf droops downward. It looks, for all the world, like the plant is responding to you, like it felt your touch and decided to react. This plant, often called the sensitive plant or the touch-me-not, has fascinated people for centuries. It grows wild in Central and South America, and it responds to the slightest physical contact. A raindrop hitting its leaves, a passing insect, even a gentle breeze can trigger this folding response. For a long time, scientists thought this was just a simple mechanical reflex, nothing more interesting than a door hinge swinging shut. But then, researchers started asking deeper questions. Can the plant tell the difference between different types of touch? Can it learn that some touches are harmless? Can it remember? In 2014, a scientist named Monica Gagliano decided to find out. she designed an experiment that would have seemed more appropriate for studying animals than plants. She took Mimosa pudica plants and dropped them, gently, from a short height onto a cushioned surface. The plants, feeling the sudden motion and impact, folded their leaves closed, just as they would if touched by a predator. Then she dropped them again, and again, and again, 60 times in total over the course of a day. At first, the plants responded every time, closing their leaves with each drop. But gradually, something changed. The plants began to stop responding. After just a few drops, they kept their leaves open. They had learned that the dropping wasn't dangerous, that it didn't mean a threat was coming. They had habituated to the stimulus, filtering it out as irrelevant. This might not sound remarkable until you realize what it means. Habituation is a form of learning. It's one of the most basic types of learning that exists. Animals do it all the time. You stop noticing the hum of the refrigerator after a few minutes. A wild animal stops fleeing from a scarecrow once it realizes the scarecrow never moves. Learning to ignore harmless stimuli is a survival skill, a way to conserve energy and attention for things that actually matter. But plants weren't supposed to do this. They don't have brains, they don't have neurons. They don't have anything that remotely resembles a nervous system. And yet here they were, learning. Gagliano went further. She waited a week, then tested the plants again. Would they remember? Had the learning stuck, or would they go back to closing their leaves at the first sign of movement? The plants remembered. Even after 7 days, they didn't close their leaves when dropped. The memory had persisted. Then she waited a month. Surely, she thought, after 30 days the plants would have forgotten. But when she tested them again, the plants still remembered. They kept their leaves open. The learning had lasted for weeks, far longer than anyone expected. Even more surprisingly, Gagliano found that plants learned faster when they were stressed. Plants kept in low-light conditions, where energy was scarce, habituated to the drops more quickly than plants in bright light. It was as if they understood, in some way, that they couldn't afford to waste energy on false alarms. They needed to be smarter about how they responded. This was just the beginning. Gagliano designed another experiment, this time with pea plants. Pea plants naturally grow toward light. It's one of their most basic behaviors, written into them by millions of years of evolution. Light means energy. Energy means survival. But could a pea plant learn to associate light with something else? Could it learn a pattern? Gagliano set up a Y-shaped maze for young pea plants. At one end of the Y, she placed a light. At the same location, she also placed a fan that blew air toward the plant. Day after day, the plants grew toward the light, and day after day, they felt the breeze from the fan coming from the same direction. Then came the test. Gagliano turned off the light but left the fan running. Now there was only the breeze, no light at all. The question was simple. Would the plants still grow toward the fan, even without the light? They did. The pea plants, having learned to associate the breeze with the light, grew toward the source of the air. They had formed a learned association, much like Pavlov's famous dogs learned to associate a bell with food. Except these weren't dogs with brains and nervous systems. These were plants with roots and leaves and nothing that resembled a mind. Now, it's worth pausing here to acknowledge that not all scientists agree on how to interpret these results. Some researchers have tried to replicate Gagliano's experiments and haven't gotten the same results. Science is like that, messy and uncertain, and always questioning itself. But what's clear is that something interesting is happening, something that demands our attention. Plants, it seems, are not passive. They are not simple machines responding blindly to their environment. They are taking in information, processing it in some way, and adjusting their behavior accordingly. They are, in some meaningful sense, learning. But how? Without a brain, without neurons, how can a plant possibly learn or remember anything? The answer, as far as we understand it, involves chemicals and electrical signals. When a plant is touched, when it senses light, when it detects vibrations or chemicals in the air, these stimuli trigger changes within the plant's cells. Calcium ions flow across cell membranes, creating electrical signals that travel through the plant's tissues. These signals aren't fast, like the nerve impulses in our bodies, but they're there, moving information from one part of the plant to another. Plants also have sophisticated chemical signaling systems. They produce hormones that regulate growth, defense, and responses to stress. These hormones travel through the plant's vascular system, much like messages carried through our bloodstreams. And plants have protein networks inside their cells, complex webs of molecular interactions that can store information and coordinate responses. In a way, you could think of a plant as a kind of distributed intelligence. Instead of having one central brain making all the decisions, each part of the plant, each cell, each leaf, each root tip, is sensing and responding and communicating with the other parts. It's a network, a living network, and somehow, from all these tiny interactions, behavior emerges. Learning emerges. Memory emerges. It's humbling, really. We've spent so long assuming that intelligence requires a brain, that consciousness requires neurons. But maybe those are just the tools that animals use. Maybe intelligence is more fundamental than that, woven into the very fabric of life itself. Let's move now from touch to sound, from learning to listening. Can plants hear? It seems like a silly question. Plants don't have ears. They don't have eardrums or cochlear nerves or anything that we associate with hearing. And yet, when scientists have tested whether plants respond to sound vibrations, the answer has been a surprising yes. In a study at the University of Missouri, researchers placed caterpillars on a small flowering plant called Arabidopsis. Using sensitive equipment, they recorded the vibrations created when the caterpillars chewed on the leaves. These vibrations were specific, distinctive, a particular pattern of sound created by the insect's tiny jaws closing over and over again. Then the researchers played these vibrations back to other plants, plants that weren't being eaten, plants that had never encountered a caterpillar. And those plants, hearing the recorded sounds of chewing, responded. They increased their production of chemical defenses, compounds that make their leaves less tasty to insects. Even more remarkably, the plants didn't respond to just any sound. When the researchers played other vibrations, like the sound of wind or different insect noises, the plants didn't react. They could tell the difference between the sound of chewing and other environmental sounds. They were listening, in their own way, and responding specifically to the vibrations that signaled danger. Other research has shown that plant roots can detect the sound of water flowing through pipes underground. When given a choice, roots will grow toward the source of the sound, even if there's no moisture gradient to follow, even if the soil around them is equally dry. It's as if the roots can hear the water moving and use that information to guide their growth. How do they do it? The best guess is that plants have mechanoreceptors, tiny proteins in their cell membranes that respond to pressure and vibration. When sound waves hit the plant, these proteins detect the mechanical movement and trigger a response inside the cell. It's not hearing the way we hear, with sound waves moving through air and striking eardrums. But it's a form of perception, a way of gathering information from vibrations in the environment. There's even some evidence that certain plants can make sounds of their own. When plants are stressed, when they're running low on water or being damaged, they emit ultrasonic clicks, sounds far too high-pitched for human ears to detect. These sounds might be unintentional, just a byproduct of water columns breaking under tension inside the plant's vessels. Or they might be signals, ways of communicating stress to neighboring plants or to the underground network of fungi that connects their roots. The idea of plants communicating, of plants talking to each other, brings us to one of the most fascinating discoveries in plant science: the Wood Wide Web. Beneath your feet, if you're standing in a forest or a meadow, or even a well-established garden, there's a network, a vast, intricate, invisible network of fungal threads called hyphae. These threads, finer than the finest human hair, weave through the soil, connecting the roots of different plants together. This network is created by mycorrhizal fungi that form partnerships with plant roots. The relationship is ancient, going back hundreds of millions of years, back to when plants first moved from water onto land. The fungi wrap around plant roots, or even grow inside them, and they trade resources. The plant gives the fungus sugars made through photosynthesis. The fungus gives the plant nutrients and water, gathered from a much wider area than the plant's roots could reach alone. But the network does more than just help individual plants. It connects them. A single fungal network can link dozens or even hundreds of plants together, creating an underground web of communication and resource sharing. Scientists discovered this network in the late 1990s. A researcher named Suzanne Simard was studying Douglas fir trees in the forests of British Columbia. She wanted to know if trees could share resources through these fungal connections. So she designed an experiment. She covered some trees with plastic bags so they couldn't photosynthesize. Then she used radioactive carbon tracers to see if carbon from other trees would flow into the shaded ones through the fungal network. It did. The trees were sharing. Carbon moved from the trees with plenty of sunlight to the trees that were shaded, helping them survive even when they couldn't make their own food. The network was redistributing resources, balancing things out. Further research revealed even more. Mother trees, the oldest and largest trees in a forest, have the most extensive fungal connections. They're like hubs in the network, connected to many younger trees. And these mother trees seem to recognize their own offspring. When given a choice, they send more resources to their own seedlings than to unrelated trees. They're nurturing their young through the underground network. The network can also carry warning signals. When a plant is attacked by insects or infected by disease, it releases chemicals into the soil and through the fungal network. Neighboring plants detect these chemical signals and respond by ramping up their own defenses, even before they've been attacked. It's like an early warning system, a way of saying, danger is coming, prepare yourselves. In one study, researchers found that when aphids attacked a plant, the plant sent a chemical signal through the mycorrhizal network to its neighbors. Those neighboring plants, receiving the warning, released their own chemicals into the air, compounds that attracted parasitic wasps, the natural enemies of aphids. The network allowed the plants to coordinate their defenses, calling in reinforcements before the threat even arrived. This is communication, not communication the way humans do it, with words and syntax and meaning, but communication nonetheless. Information flowing from one organism to another, changing behavior, coordinating responses. It's a conversation in chemistry and fungal threads, a language older than any human tongue. And it raises a question that scientists are still grappling with. If plants can communicate, if they can share resources and coordinate defenses, are they cooperating? Do they have something like social relationships? Some researchers think so. They point to the way trees in a forest seem to support each other, how older trees help younger ones, how plants connected by the network grow better than isolated plants. It looks, they say, like a community working together. Other researchers are more cautious. They argue that what looks like cooperation might just be side effects of the fungi acting in their own self-interest. The fungi need the plants to survive, so they can keep getting sugars. So, of course, they help plants that are struggling. It's not altruism, it's enlightened self-interest. Maybe it's both. Maybe the distinction between cooperation and self-interest isn't as clear as we think. After all, in our own bodies, our cells cooperate with each other. But each cell is also acting in its own interest, trying to survive and function. From the outside, it looks like cooperation. From the inside, maybe it's just individual cells doing what they need to do. The outcome is the same either way. What's undeniable is that the wood wide web exists. It's real, it's measurable, and it's changing the way we think about forests. A forest isn't just a collection of individual trees standing alone. It's a superorganism, a network of interdependent beings sharing information and resources. Each tree is connected to others, part of something larger than itself. And beneath it all, in the darkness of the soil, the fungi are threading their way through the earth, connecting roots, moving nutrients, carrying signals. Silent partners in the ancient dance of life. Now let's turn our attention to what plants can see. You might think that seeing requires eyes, and in a way, you'd be right. Plants don't have eyes like ours. They don't have lenses or retinas or optic nerves. But they can detect light, and they can do it with remarkable precision. Every plant cell contains proteins called photoreceptors. These proteins are sensitive to different wavelengths of light. Some respond to blue light, some to red light, some to far red light. When light hits these proteins, it changes their shape. And that change triggers a cascade of responses inside the cell. Plants use these photoreceptors to gather an astonishing amount of information. They can tell what time of day it is based on the quality of light. They can sense which direction light is coming from and grow toward it. They can detect when they're being shaded by another plant, because the light that filters through leaves is richer in far red wavelengths than direct sunlight. This allows them to tell if there's competition nearby, and they can adjust their growth accordingly, either trying to grow taller to escape the shade, or investing more in roots if escaping isn't possible. Some plants can even count hours of light and darkness. They have an internal clock, a circadian rhythm much like our own, that keeps track of day and night. This clock allows them to predict dawn and prepare for it, ramping up their photosynthesis machinery before the sun even rises. They can also measure day length, which tells them what season it is and when it's time to flower. But perhaps the strangest discovery about plant vision involves a climbing vine from Chile called Bocquila trifoliolata. This vine can change the shape and size of its leaves to match the plant it's climbing on. If it climbs an oak tree, its leaves look like oak leaves. If it climbs a different tree, its leaves mimic that tree's leaves instead. The vine doesn't touch the host plant. It doesn't send roots into it. It doesn't share a mycorrhizal network with it. And yet somehow, it sees the host plant's leaves and copies them. How? No one knows for sure. Some researchers have suggested that the vine might be able to detect light reflected off the host plant's leaves and use that information to adjust its own leaf shape. It sounds impossible, like plant vision at a level we can barely comprehend. But the vine does it, somehow. and scientists are still trying to figure out how. Which brings us to a fundamental question, one that's been lurking beneath this entire conversation. What is intelligence? For most of human history, we've defined intelligence in terms of what humans do: problem solving, abstract thinking, language, planning for the future. We've built a whole hierarchy with humans at the top, then other mammals, then birds, then fish, then insects, and plants somewhere at the bottom, barely registering. But what if that hierarchy is wrong? What if intelligence isn't one thing, but many things? What if it's a toolkit, and different organisms use different tools depending on their needs? One definition of intelligence, a broad one, is the ability to solve problems using information from the environment to achieve a goal. By that definition, plants are intelligent. A plant trying to find water is solving a problem. It gathers information from the soil, from the air, from the position of the sun, and it adjusts its growth to reach its goal. It makes decisions, not conscious decisions the way we make them, but decisions nonetheless. Grow this way or that way. Invest in leaves or roots. Flower now or wait. Plants face choices all the time. When a vine is climbing and it finds two possible supports, one sturdy and one flimsy, it chooses the sturdy one. Research has shown that pea plants, when given a choice of supports, will grow toward the one that's more stable. They assess the options and pick the better one. When a plant is attacked by herbivores, it has to decide how to respond: produce toxic chemicals to defend itself, or let the damaged leaves go and focus energy on growing new ones. The answer depends on the plant's resources, on how much damage has been done, on what time of year it is. The plant has to weigh these factors and make a choice. Some plants even seem to have something like attention. Researchers have found that when plants are dealing with multiple stimuli at once, they prioritize some over others. A plant being touched and also exposed to light changes will focus more on one stimulus than the other, depending on which is more relevant to its survival. It's as if the plant is allocating its processing power, deciding what deserves attention and what can be ignored. All of this happens without a brain, without a central control system. It happens through networks of cells communicating with each other, through electrical signals and hormones and changes in gene expression. It's a distributed intelligence spread throughout the plant's body. Some scientists have compared this to a beehive. No individual bee understands the hive. No bee is in charge. But the hive as a whole displays intelligent behavior, building complex structures, regulating temperature, finding food, defending itself. The intelligence emerges from the interactions of many simple individuals. Maybe plants are like that. Each cell is simple, following basic rules. But put millions of cells together, let them communicate and coordinate, and something more emerges. Not consciousness, at least not consciousness as we know it, but something, a kind of awareness, a sensitivity to the world, a capacity to respond in flexible, adaptive ways. Is that intelligence? It depends on who you ask. Some scientists say yes, absolutely. Others say we're stretching the definition too far, that we're anthropomorphizing, seeing things in plants that aren't really there. But maybe the problem isn't with the plants. Maybe the problem is with our definitions. Maybe we've been too narrow in how we think about minds and intelligence and awareness. Maybe we've assumed that our way of being aware, the animal way with brains and neurons, is the only way. But life is creative, endlessly creative, and it finds many paths to the same goals. Think about it this way. Plants have been evolving for hundreds of millions of years, solving the same basic problems that animals solve: finding food, avoiding danger, reproducing, responding to a changing environment. They just do it differently. They can't run away, so they develop chemical defenses. They can't hunt, so they photosynthesize. They can't talk, so they communicate through root exudates and airborne chemicals. They've had just as much time as animals to evolve, just as much pressure to become sophisticated and adaptive. Why should we assume they haven't developed their own form of intelligence, suited to their own way of life? One of the most striking examples of plant decision-making involves resource allocation. Plants, like all living things, have limited resources. They can't do everything at once. They have to decide where to invest their energy. A tree growing in a sunny meadow might invest heavily in leaves, spreading wide and capturing as much light as possible. But a tree growing in the shade of a forest can't compete in the canopy, so it might invest more in roots, reaching deeper for water and nutrients, waiting patiently for a gap to open in the canopy above. When a plant is attacked by herbivores, it faces a trade-off. Defending itself requires energy and resources. Making toxic chemicals is expensive, but losing too many leaves is also costly. The plant has to balance these costs, deciding how much to invest in defense versus growth. Research has shown that plants make these decisions based on their circumstances. A plant that's well-fed and healthy might invest more in defense. A plant that's struggling might let the damaged parts go and focus on staying alive. The decisions are context-dependent, flexible, adaptive. In one fascinating study, researchers found that goldenrod plants adjust their defenses based on whether they have neighbors. A goldenrod plant that's alone responds differently to being eaten than a goldenrod plant surrounded by others. The solitary plant knows it can't afford to drive the herbivores to a neighbor because there is no neighbor, so it tolerates more damage. But a plant with neighbors responds more aggressively, producing chemicals that make the herbivore move on, pushing the problem onto someone else. How does the plant know if it has neighbors? It senses light reflected off nearby leaves, light in the far red spectrum that tells it other plants are close. It uses this information to adjust its strategy. That's intelligent behavior, behavior that's sensitive to context and adjusted based on information. Some researchers argue that plants even show something like personality. Different individual plants, even of the same species, respond to stress in different ways. Some are risk takers, investing heavily in growth even when resources are scarce. Others are more conservative, growing slowly and steadily. Some plants are aggressive competitors, quickly outgrowing their neighbors. Others are more cooperative, seeming to share resources more readily. These differences aren't just random, they're consistent over time. The same plant, tested repeatedly, shows the same tendencies. It's not consciousness, not personality in the human sense, but it's individuality, variation in behavior that goes beyond simple genetics or environment. Now, as we drift deeper into this green world, let's consider what all of this means. What does it change to know that plants can learn and remember? That they communicate and make decisions? That they might, in their own way, be intelligent? For one thing, it changes how we see the world around us. That tree outside your window isn't just standing there. It's sensing the weather, tracking the sun, communicating with other trees through the soil, adjusting its growth and defenses based on information it's gathering from dozens of different sources. It's alive in a way we hadn't fully appreciated, active and responsive and aware. It also raises ethical questions, though not simple ones. If plants can learn and respond, does that change how we should treat them? Should we farm differently, garden differently, interact with plants with more care. Some people jump to extreme conclusions here, suggesting that we shouldn't eat plants if they're intelligent. But that misses the point. Intelligence doesn't mean suffering. Plants don't have pain receptors the way animals do. They don't have a central nervous system that could create the experience of pain. They respond to damage, yes, but response isn't the same as suffering. What it does mean is that plants deserve our respect, not because they suffer, but because they're remarkable. They're complex, sophisticated, finely tuned to their environments in ways we're only beginning to understand. They're partners in the web of life, not just passive background scenery. And maybe, just maybe, studying plant intelligence can teach us something about intelligence itself, about how it emerges from simple interactions, about the many forms it can take, about the fact that awareness and responsiveness might be woven into life at a level deeper than neurons and brains. There's something deeply humbling about this. We've spent so long thinking of ourselves as the pinnacle of creation, the only truly intelligent beings on a planet of instinct and reflex. But the more we learn, the more we discover that intelligence is everywhere, in forms we never expected. Octopuses, with their distributed nervous systems and problem-solving abilities. Crows, making tools and remembering human faces. Slime molds, single-celled organisms that can solve mazes and make decisions. And now plants, learning and communicating and making choices without a single neuron. Maybe intelligence isn't rare. Maybe it's common. Maybe the universe is full of different ways of being aware, different ways of processing information and responding to the world. Maybe we're just one note in a symphony of consciousness, and we're finally starting to hear the other instruments. Let's circle back to where we started, with that touch-me-not plant, Mimosa pudica, folding its leaves. We know now that this isn't just a mechanical reflex. The plant is sensing touch, processing that information, making a decision about whether to respond. It can learn to ignore harmless stimuli. It can remember that learning for weeks. But there's something else, something we haven't talked about yet. The mechanism behind the folding. How does the plant move so quickly? At the base of each leaf and each leaflet, there are specialized cells called pulvini. These cells can change their water pressure very rapidly. When the plant is touched, an electrical signal races through the tissue, reaching the pulvinus in a fraction of a second. The signal triggers the cells to release water, causing them to collapse. As the cells deflate, the leaf folds. It's astonishingly fast, happening in less than a second. And it's reversible. After a few minutes, the cells pump the water back in, and the leaf opens again. This rapid movement requires energy. It costs the plant to do this, which is why the plant has evolved to be selective about when to respond, when to spend the energy on folding, and when to save it. And this brings us to a beautiful insight. The plant's behavior is economic. It's managing resources, balancing costs and benefits, making decisions about when an investment is worth it. That's intelligent behavior in any system, whether it's a human, an animal, or a plant. The electrical signals that race through plant tissues are slower than the nerve impulses in animals, but they're real and measurable. Scientists can record them using sensitive electrodes. When you touch a Venus flytrap, electrical signals spread from the trigger hairs throughout the trap. The plant counts these signals. One touch isn't enough to close the trap. That could be a false alarm, a raindrop, or a bit of debris. But 2 touches within about 20 seconds, that's probably prey. The trap snaps shut. This counting ability is remarkable. The plant is keeping track of events over time, adding them up, and only responding when a threshold is reached. It's a form of short-term memory, a way of filtering out noise and responding only to meaningful patterns. And the Venus flytrap doesn't stop counting there. Once the trap has closed, it continues to count. If the trapped object moves, triggering the hairs inside the trap, the plant counts those movements too. After 5 movements, the trap seals more tightly and begins releasing digestive enzymes. The plant has confirmed that it's caught something alive, something worth digesting. If nothing moves, if it was just a pebble or a twig, the trap reopens after a day or two. No energy wasted on trying to digest non-food. This is sophisticated behavior. The plant is gathering information over multiple timescales, from seconds to days, using that information to make staged decisions about how to respond. It's processing, evaluating, acting appropriately, all without a single neuron. Other carnivorous plants show similar cleverness. The sundew plant has sticky tentacles that trap insects. When an insect lands on a tentacle, that tentacle curves inward, bringing the prey toward the center of the leaf. But nearby tentacles also curve inward, even though they weren't touched. The plant is coordinating the movements of multiple structures to secure its meal. Information is traveling through the leaf, and different parts are responding in concert. The pitcher plant takes a different approach. It creates a slippery tube filled with digestive fluid. Insects are attracted by nectar at the rim, then slip and fall into the trap. But what's fascinating is how the plant adjusts its trap based on conditions. In wet weather, when insects are harder to catch, some pitcher plants produce more attractive nectar. In dry weather, when insects are abundant, they produce less. The plant is adjusting its investment in attracting prey based on availability, like a business adjusting its advertising budget based on market conditions. Think about a sunflower tracking the sun across the sky. Young sunflowers move their heads from east to west during the day, following the sun's path. Then, at night, they turn back east, ready for sunrise. This movement is called heliotropism, and it requires energy. The plant has to actively grow on one side of the stem faster than the other to make the head tilt. It's expensive, but it's worth it. Flowers that face the sun are warmer, and warmer flowers attract more pollinators. The plant invests energy in tracking the sun because it pays off in reproduction. It's a calculation, a trade-off, an economic decision. Older sunflowers stop tracking. Once they've opened fully and are focused on making seeds, they face east permanently, toward the rising sun. The morning warmth helps their seeds develop. They've switched strategies, from maximizing pollination to maximizing seed production. Different goals, different behaviors. All of this is programmed into the plant's biology, shaped by millions of years of evolution. But the plant still has to execute these programs in real time, responding to actual sunlight, actual temperature, actual conditions. It's not rigidly following a script. It's improvising within a framework, adjusting to the world as it finds it. And maybe that's what intelligence is at its core. Not consciousness, not self-awareness, but the ability to respond flexibly to a complex world. To gather information, process it, and adjust behavior to achieve goals. By that measure, plants are intelligent. Not like us, but in their own way. Let's spend some time underground now, in the world of roots, because that's where some of the most remarkable plant behaviors happen. Roots are often overlooked. We see the leaves, the flowers, the stems reaching up toward light. But beneath our feet, In the darkness of the soil, roots are doing incredible things. Every root has a tip, and that tip is like a tiny brain. It's called the root apex, and it's packed with cells that sense the environment. These cells can detect gravity, so the root knows which way is down. They can detect moisture, chemicals, obstacles, even the roots of other plants nearby. And they integrate all this information to decide which direction to grow. A single plant can have thousands or even millions of these root tips, each one exploring the soil independently, making local decisions about where to go next. Together, they form a distributed intelligence, a network of semi-independent agents working toward the common goal of finding water and nutrients. Scientists have observed that roots can navigate around obstacles, taking the path of least resistance through the soil. If a root encounters a rock, it grows around it. If it encounters toxic soil, it grows away from it. These aren't random movements. The root is assessing options and choosing paths. Even more remarkably, roots seem to be able to recognize other roots. When two roots from the same plant meet underground, they avoid competing with each other. They grow in different directions, dividing the territory efficiently. But when roots from different plants meet, especially from different species, they compete. They may grow more aggressively in that area, trying to claim resources before the other plant can. How do roots tell self from non-self? Scientists aren't entirely sure, but it probably involves chemical signals. Each plant has a unique chemical signature, released through its roots. Roots can detect these chemicals and identify whether another root belongs to the same plant or to a competitor. Some plants take this even further. Studies have shown that certain plants can recognize their relatives, their siblings, and they treat them differently from strangers. When grown near related plants, they're less competitive, growing fewer aggressive roots. When grown near unrelated plants, they're more aggressive. It's as if they're cooperating with family and competing with strangers, a strategy that makes evolutionary sense because relatives share genes. This kin recognition has been observed in many plant species, from sea rockets growing on beaches to plants in experimental gardens. It suggests that plants are tracking information about their neighbors and adjusting their behavior accordingly. That's social awareness in a very real sense. Roots also display something that looks like memory. When roots encounter good soil, rich in nutrients, they tend to explore that area more thoroughly. If they later encounter poor soil in a different location, they don't invest as much effort there. It's as if they're comparing current conditions to past experiences and allocating their growth accordingly. In one experiment, researchers trained pea plant roots by repeatedly offering them water on one side of the pot. The roots learned to grow preferentially toward that side. Later, when the researchers changed the location of the water, the roots initially kept growing toward the old location. They had formed a memory, an expectation based on past experience. Eventually, they adjusted to the new reality, but the memory influenced their behavior at first. This kind of adaptive behavior based on experience is what we would call learning in any animal. The roots remembered where resources had been and biased their growth toward those locations. When the environment changed, they updated their behavior, but the old memory lingered. There's also evidence that roots communicate with each other through chemical signals released into the soil. When one part of a root system encounters a problem, like a nutrient deficiency or a toxic compound, it can send chemical messages to other parts of the root system, warning them or requesting resources. The plant coordinates its underground behavior through these chemical conversations. And then, there's the relationship between roots and soil organisms. The soil isn't just dirt. It's alive, teeming with bacteria, fungi, nematodes, insects, and countless other organisms. And plants don't just passively exist in this environment, they actively shape it. Roots release chemicals called exudates into the soil around them. These exudates include sugars, amino acids, organic acids, and other compounds. Some of these chemicals feed beneficial bacteria that help the plant. Others inhibit harmful bacteria. Some attract symbiotic fungi, others repel pests. The plant is essentially farming the soil, cultivating a community of microorganisms that support its growth. Different plants release different exudates, creating different microbial communities around their roots. And plants can adjust what they release based on conditions, changing the composition of their root microbiome in response to stress or nutrient availability. This is sophisticated management of the environment. The plant is using chemistry to recruit allies, to deter enemies, to modify conditions in its favor. It's manipulating other organisms for its own benefit, which is a hallmark of intelligent behavior across the living world. Some plants go even further in managing relationships. Legumes like beans and peas and clover form partnerships with bacteria called rhizobia. These bacteria live inside special structures on the plant's roots called nodules. The bacteria take nitrogen from the air and convert it into a form the plant can use. In return, the plant gives the bacteria sugars and a safe place to live. But here's what's remarkable. The plant monitors its bacterial partners. If a nodule isn't producing enough nitrogen, the plant reduces the flow of sugars to that nodule, starving the underperforming bacteria. If a nodule is productive, the plant rewards it with more resources. The plant is essentially managing its workforce, rewarding good workers and punishing lazy ones. This has been called biological market theory. The plant and the bacteria are trading resources, and both partners monitor the deal to make sure it's fair. It's cooperation, but it's also calculation. Each side is looking out for its own interests, adjusting its investment based on what it gets back. The same thing happens with mycorrhizal fungi. Plants that form these partnerships don't just passively accept whatever the fungus provides. They monitor the exchange. If the fungus is delivering lots of nutrients, the plant sends more carbon to that fungal partner. If the fungus isn't holding up its end of the bargain, the plant reduces the carbon supply. Plants are essentially trading on a biological market, making deals, monitoring partners, adjusting their investments based on returns. That's economic behavior, strategic behavior, intelligent behavior. Another remarkable example of plant intelligence comes from the desert. In harsh environments where water is scarce and temperatures extreme, plants face incredible challenges, and they respond with incredible ingenuity. Consider the creosote bush, a plant that grows in the deserts of North America. This plant can detect the presence of other creosote bushes nearby through chemicals in the soil. And when it senses competitors, it does something devious. It releases toxins into the soil around its roots, chemicals that inhibit the growth of other plants. This chemical warfare is called allelopathy, and many plants do it. Black walnut trees release a compound called juglone that prevents other plants from growing near them. Eucalyptus trees drop leaves that release oils, creating a zone around the tree where few other plants can survive. Is this intelligence? It's certainly strategic. The plant is actively shaping its environment, eliminating competition, securing resources for itself. It's using chemistry the way an animal might use physical aggression or territorial behavior. Different tools, same goal. The chemical defenses that plants produce are astonishingly diverse and sophisticated. There are thousands of different defensive compounds, each targeting specific threats. Some interfere with insect digestion. Some taste terrible. Some are toxic. Some confuse insect reproduction. And plants don't just make these chemicals randomly. They produce them in response to specific threats. When a tobacco plant is attacked by caterpillars, it produces nicotine in its leaves. Nicotine is a powerful insecticide, toxic to many insects. But making nicotine is expensive. The plant invests nitrogen and energy into producing it. So the plant doesn't make nicotine all the time. It waits until it detects damage, then ramps up production. It's an on-demand defense system, activated only when needed. Even more cleverly, some plants can tell what kind of insect is eating them based on the pattern of damage and the chemicals in the insect's saliva. Different insects trigger different defensive responses. A plant attacked by aphids produces different chemicals than a plant attacked by caterpillars, because the two pests have different vulnerabilities. This is like having a medicine cabinet and choosing the right medicine for the right illness. The plant diagnoses the problem and prescribes the appropriate solution. That requires sensing, identification, and targeted response. All markers of intelligent behavior. Some plants take their defenses even further, recruiting predators to help them. When a corn plant is attacked by caterpillars, it releases a specific blend of chemicals into the air. These chemicals travel downwind and they attract parasitic wasps. The wasps lay their eggs inside the caterpillars, and the wasp larvae eventually consume the caterpillar from the inside. The plant has essentially called for help, and help arrives. What's remarkable is how specific this signaling is. The plant doesn't just release random chemicals, it releases a particular blend that the wasps recognize. And different plants release different blends for different pests, attracting the specific predators that will be most effective. It's targeted communication, a distress signal sent to the right audience. Lima beans do something similar. When spider mites attack lima bean leaves, the plant releases chemicals that attract predatory mites, natural enemies of spider mites. The predatory mites arrive and eat the pests, solving the plant's problem. The plant has outsourced its defense, using chemical signals to hire bodyguards. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Lima bean plants can tell the difference between being damaged by spider mites and being damaged by predatory mites. They only release the attractant chemicals when attacked by the pest species, not when the beneficial predators are present. The plant can distinguish friend from foe based on the subtle differences in how they damage leaves. This level of discrimination is sophisticated. The plant is processing sensory information, categorizing threats, and responding appropriately to each category. It's pattern recognition, decision-making, strategic action. There are also examples of plants that fake signals. Some flowers produce scents that mimic the alarm pheromones of aphids. When aphids detect these scents, they think predators are nearby and avoid the flower. The plant gets rid of pests without actually having to produce toxic chemicals or call in predators. It's deception, pure and simple. Other plants produce fake structures. Some have leaves with spots that look like insect eggs. Female insects, seeing these fake eggs, think the leaf is already claimed by another insect and lay their eggs elsewhere. The plant has created a visual decoy, protecting itself through mimicry. And then there's the question of plant immunity and memory of past infections. When a plant is infected by a pathogen, like a virus or bacteria, it activates defensive genes. Some of these defenses are local, fighting the infection at the site, but some are systemic, spreading throughout the plant to prepare other tissues for possible attack. Even more remarkably, plants can remember past infections. A plant that has survived an attack by a pathogen responds faster and more strongly if that same pathogen attacks again. This is called systemic acquired resistance, and it's a form of immune memory, similar in principle to how animal immune systems work, though the mechanisms are completely different. The plant remembers, not in neurons or antibodies, but in chemical markers attached to its DNA, epigenetic changes that persist over time. These changes make the plant more prepared, more ready to fight if the threat returns. It's learning from experience, storing information, using past events to prepare for future challenges. Some plants can even pass this memory to their offspring. If a parent plant was attacked by a particular pest, its seeds sometimes show enhanced resistance to that same pest, even though the seeds themselves were never exposed. The plant is transmitting information about threats to the next generation, giving its offspring a head start in dealing with dangers it might face. This transgenerational immune priming has been observed in multiple plant species. It's a form of inheritance that goes beyond DNA, beyond the genetic code. It's the inheritance of experience, of environmental information, passed from parent to offspring. In the animal world, we might call this cultural transmission, teaching offspring about dangers in the environment. In plants, it happens through chemistry, through epigenetic marks that make seeds more prepared for the challenges their parents faced. Some plants take this even further, manipulating other organisms to do their bidding. Consider the acacia tree, which grows thorns, but also produces sweet nectar at the base of those thorns. Ants are attracted to the nectar, and they take up residence in the tree, living in the hollow thorns. In exchange for the food and shelter, the ants defend the tree, attacking any herbivore that tries to eat the leaves. The tree has essentially hired bodyguards, paying them in food. It's a mutualistic relationship, beneficial to both. But it's also strategic, a solution to the problem of being rooted in one place and unable to run from danger. There are even stranger examples. Some plants produce flowers that mimic the appearance and scent of female insects. Male insects, fooled by the disguise, try to mate with the flower. In the process, they pick up pollen and carry it to the next flower, pollinating the plant. The orchid gets pollinated without offering any nectar or reward. It's deception, pure and simple, and it works. Or consider the plant that can smell the saliva of its predators. When a caterpillar chews on a tomato plant, it leaves saliva on the damaged tissue. The plant detects specific chemicals in that saliva and responds by producing compounds that make the leaves taste terrible. The caterpillar stops eating and moves on. The plant has identified the specific threat and tailored its defense to match. Even more remarkably, some plants can tell the difference between being damaged by a caterpillar and being damaged by the wind or by hail. Mechanical damage alone doesn't trigger the full defensive response. The plant waits for the chemical signature of an actual herbivore before investing energy in defense. It's discriminating, sorting real threats from false alarms. All of these behaviors, from chemical warfare to manipulating ants to detecting predator saliva, require the plant to process information and respond in specific, adaptive ways. It's problem-solving. It's using the environment strategically. It's intelligence expressed through chemistry instead of neurons. Now let's talk about time. Plants are exquisite timekeepers, tracking seconds, hours, days, and seasons with precision that rivals any clock. We've already mentioned circadian rhythms, the internal clocks that track day and night. These clocks are present in nearly all living things from bacteria to humans. But in plants, these clocks do remarkable things. A plant's circadian clock allows it to anticipate dawn. Before the sun rises, the plant activates genes involved in photosynthesis, preparing its cellular machinery for the coming light. When the sun appears, the plant is ready. It doesn't have to scramble to respond. It predicted the event and prepared in advance. That's anticipation, planning for the future based on reliable patterns. The circadian clock also helps plants coordinate their physiology. Different processes happen at different times of day. Some genes turn on in the morning, others at noon, others at night. Growth happens mostly at night, when the plant isn't busy photosynthesizing. Flowers open at specific times to coincide with when their pollinators are active. Some flowers open in the morning, some open at dusk. Some open only at night. Each species has evolved to time its flowering to match its pollinators' schedules. But plants don't just track days, they track seasons. Many plants need to experience winter before they can flower. This is called vernalization, and it prevents plants from flowering at the wrong time of year. A plant that flowered in autumn, just before winter, would waste its reproduction. Its seeds would freeze. So many plants have evolved to count cold days, to track winter, and only flower after they've experienced enough cold. How do they count? Through chemistry, through changes in gene expression that accumulate over time. Each cold day modifies the plant slightly, and after enough modifications have accumulated, the plant is ready. It has experienced winter. Spring can come, and the plant knows it's safe to flower. The memory of winter is stored in the plant's tissues, in chemical modifications that persist until triggered. Some plants take seasonal tracking even further. Bamboo, for example, has one of the strangest flowering patterns in the plant kingdom. Many bamboo species grow for decades, sometimes 60 or even 100 years, without flowering. Then, all at once, every plant of that species flowers simultaneously, produces seeds, and then the adult plants often perish. How do millions of individual bamboo plants, scattered across a landscape, all know to flower at the same time? They're counting years. Somehow, through mechanisms we don't fully understand, bamboo plants keep track of long periods of time. They measure decades, and when the count reaches the right number, they flower. It's an internal calendar spanning lifetimes, coordinated across entire populations. This mass flowering has advantages. It overwhelms seed predators. In a normal year, animals would eat most of the bamboo seeds. But when every bamboo plant produces seeds at once, there are far too many seeds for all the animals to eat. Enough survive to grow into the next generation. The plants have synchronized their reproduction to outwit predators through sheer numbers. Other plants track more subtle cycles. Some can sense the lunar cycle, the phases of the moon. Certain seaweeds time their reproduction to specific phases of the moon, releasing their reproductive cells during the highest tides when dispersal will be most effective. They're tracking the 28-day lunar cycle, coordinating with an astronomical event to maximize their success. And then there's the question of how plants know when to drop their leaves in autumn. It's not just temperature. Trees track day length, measuring how much light they receive each day. As days shorten in fall, the tree detects this change and begins preparing for winter. It withdraws nutrients from the leaves, stores them in the trunk and roots, and then seals off the connection to each leaf. The leaves, no longer receiving water or nutrients, dry out and fall. This is planned obsolescence, a strategic retreat. The tree is harvesting resources from its leaves before winter, saving them for spring when it will need them to grow new leaves. It's not just letting leaves go, it's actively reclaiming their valuable components, nitrogen and phosphorus and other minerals, pulling them back into the trunk for safekeeping. Different trees have different triggers for this process. Some respond primarily to day length. Some respond more to temperature. Some use a combination of signals. But all of them are measuring time, tracking environmental cues, predicting the future, and adjusting their behavior to prepare for changes that haven't happened yet. This is forward planning, anticipation, preparation. The tree isn't responding to winter. It's responding to signals that predict winter is coming. It's using information about the present and the past to make decisions about the future. That's sophisticated temporal reasoning, time awareness spread across an entire organism. And here we come to perhaps the deepest question of all. If plants are intelligent, if they can learn and remember and communicate, are they conscious? Do they have inner experiences? Is there something it's like to be a plant? This question is hard, maybe impossibly hard. We can't ask a plant what it's like to be a plant. We can barely define what we mean by consciousness. Philosophers have argued about this for thousands of years without reaching agreement. What we can say is this: plants respond to their environment in ways that are flexible, adaptive, and context-dependent. They integrate information from many sources. They make decisions that balance competing needs. They show behaviors that in animals we would associate with awareness. But they do all of this without the structures we associate with consciousness. No brain, no centralized processing, no neurons firing in patterns that might correspond to thoughts or feelings. The intelligence is distributed, spread throughout the plant's body, emerging from the interactions of millions of cells. Does that distribution matter? Maybe consciousness doesn't require a brain. Maybe it can emerge from other kinds of organization, other kinds of information processing. Or maybe consciousness is the wrong word entirely. Maybe plants have something else, something we don't have a name for, because it's outside our experience. Some scientists prefer to talk about plant behavior or plant cognition rather than plant intelligence or consciousness. It's a way of acknowledging what plants do without claiming to know what it's like on the inside. Others argue that these semantic debates miss the point. What matters isn't whether plants feel or think in ways we recognize. What matters is that they're active participants in their world, shaping and being shaped by their environments, responding to challenges with flexibility and creativity. And maybe that's enough. Maybe we don't need to solve the mystery of plant consciousness to appreciate the wonder of what plants do. Maybe it's enough to know that when you walk through a forest, you're walking through a network of communication and exchange. A community of organisms sensing and responding and adjusting to each other. The trees above, the plants below, the fungi threading through the soil, all of them talking in their own languages, coordinating, competing, cooperating. Let's consider for a moment what consciousness even means. For humans, consciousness includes self-awareness, the ability to reflect on our own thoughts, to imagine ourselves from the outside, to plan far into the future. But that's a very specific kind of consciousness, one that evolved in social primates with large brains. There might be other kinds of consciousness, simpler forms, more distributed forms. The philosopher Thomas Nagel famously asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" His point was that bats experience the world through echolocation, through sound bouncing off objects in the dark. Their conscious experience must be completely different from ours, but it's still a conscious experience of something. Maybe we should be asking, what is it like to be a tree? What is it like to grow for hundreds of years in one place, to feel the sun warming your leaves, to sense the seasons turning, to communicate through underground networks with other trees, to remember droughts and cold winters and prepare accordingly. We can't know. We can never fully know what it's like to be something so different from ourselves. But we can recognize that the tree is experiencing its world in some way, processing information, responding, existing in a relationship with its environment that is active and ongoing. Some researchers have suggested that consciousness might be a spectrum, not an on-off switch. At one end, you have simple responsiveness, stimulus and response. In the middle, you have more complex processing, learning, memory, decision-making. At the far end, you have self-reflection, abstract thought, imagination. Humans are somewhere near that far end. Plants are somewhere in the middle, but they're on the spectrum. They're not inert objects, they're subjects, experiencing entities, however different that experience might be from ours. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has written about consciousness as arising from the body's need to maintain itself, to regulate its internal states in response to the world. By this definition, any living thing that senses its environment and adjusts to maintain its own survival has at least a basic form of consciousness. Plants certainly do that. They regulate their internal chemistry, their water balance, their energy production, all in response to external conditions. They're self-regulating systems, aware of themselves and their needs at some level. And maybe that's what awareness really is at its most basic. Not thought, not reflection, but the simple fact of being a self-maintaining system that needs to track the difference between inside and outside, between self and world, in order to survive. A plant knows, in some sense, where it ends and the rest of the world begins. It knows when it's been touched, when it's been damaged, when it needs water or light. That knowing might not involve consciousness as we experience it, but it's a form of knowing nonetheless. There's a particular kind of communication that deserves special mention. Plants can warn each other. When a plant is attacked, it doesn't just defend itself, it sends out a message, a chemical signal released into the air or through the roots. And neighboring plants receive that message and prepare their own defenses. This has been observed in many plant species. When a maple tree is attacked by insects, it releases volatile, organic compounds, chemicals that drift through the air. Other maple trees, downwind, detect these chemicals and respond by increasing their own defensive compounds before the insects arrive. The same thing happens underground. A plant being eaten by root-feeding insects can send chemical signals through the soil to nearby plants. Those plants detect the warning and ramp up their defenses, sometimes even producing compounds that attract beneficial nematodes, tiny worms that prey on the root-feeding insects. It's a neighborhood watch system, plants looking out for each other. Or maybe it's not that benevolent. Maybe the plant releasing the warning isn't trying to help its neighbors. Maybe it's just a side effect of the plant's own defense response. The chemicals it releases to deter its own attackers happen to blow in the wind, and other plants happen to detect them. The result is the same either way. Information flows. Plants that receive the warning are better prepared. They survive better. Whether it's cooperation or coincidence, the system works. And that, perhaps, is the key insight. In nature, intention doesn't matter as much as outcome. It doesn't matter if the tree meant to help its neighbors. It matters that the system, as a whole, becomes more resilient. The forest becomes harder to damage because of these information flows. This is what ecosystems do. They create feedback loops, connections, flows of energy and information. And somewhere in those flows, something like intelligence emerges. not in any single organism, but in the relationships between them. We're part of that system too, whether we remember it or not. We breathe oxygen made by plants. We eat food grown in soil enriched by fungal networks. We build our homes from wood, wear clothes made from plant fibers, drink water filtered by roots and soil. We're embedded in the green world, dependent on it, shaped by it. And maybe learning about plant intelligence can help us remember that, can help us see plants not as things, but as beings. Different from us, yes, but alive in a deep and meaningful way. As we think about the future, understanding plant intelligence has practical implications too. Agriculture could change dramatically if we pay attention to what plants are telling us. Right now, modern farming often involves growing single crops in huge fields, applying fertilizers and pesticides on schedules, treating plants as passive recipients of our management. But what if we listen to the plants instead? What if we paid attention to the signals they send when they're stressed, when they need water, when pests are approaching? Some researchers are already working on this. They're developing sensors that can detect the chemical signals plants release when under stress. These sensors could tell farmers exactly when and where problems are developing, allowing for targeted responses instead of blanket treatments. It would be more efficient, less wasteful, better for the environment. Other researchers are studying how to use plants' natural communication systems to improve agriculture. If plants warn each other about pests, maybe we could enhance those warnings using the plant's own language to spread defense signals through a field. We could trigger the plant's immune responses before pests arrive, reducing the need for pesticides. We could also think differently about crop diversity. In nature, diverse plant communities are more resilient than monocultures. Different species support each other through mycorrhizal networks, through complementary root systems, through chemical interactions. Some fix nitrogen that others use. Some provide shade that others need. They form communities, not collections of isolated individuals. Modern agriculture has moved away from this diversity in favor of efficiency. But efficiency, measured only in yield per acre, misses the broader picture. Diverse systems are more stable, more resistant to pests and diseases, more resilient to climate change. Understanding how plants interact and support each other could guide us toward more sustainable farming systems. There's also the question of how we treat plants in our daily lives. Knowing that plants are sensing, learning, responding entities, does that change how we garden, how we interact with houseplants, how we walk through forests? It doesn't mean we shouldn't prune plants or harvest crops. Plants don't suffer in the way animals do. They don't have pain receptors or a centralized nervous system that could create the experience of suffering. But it does mean we might approach plants with more respect, more awareness of what we're interacting with. A gardener who understands that plants can learn might talk to their plants not because the plants understand words, but because the vibrations of the voice, the warm breath, the carbon dioxide exhaled, all become part of the plant's environment. The gardener becomes part of the system, another organism in the plant's world, sending signals even if unintentionally. Someone walking in a forest might move more thoughtfully, aware that every step compresses the soil, potentially disrupting the mycorrhizal networks beneath. Not paralyzed by this awareness, but simply more conscious of being part of something larger, a participant in an ecosystem rather than a visitor looking at scenery. And maybe, just maybe, understanding plant intelligence can make us rethink some of our assumptions about intelligence itself. We've built our entire conception of intelligence around brains, around centralized processing, around the animal model. But plants show us another way. Distributed intelligence, emergent behavior, sophisticated responses arising from simple rules followed by many parts. This has implications beyond biology. Computer scientists studying artificial intelligence often look to the brain as a model. But maybe they should also look at plants, at root systems, at the way swarm. Intelligence emerges from simple individuals following local rules. Maybe the future of AI isn't in building bigger central processors, but in creating distributed networks that communicate and self-organize, more like a forest than a brain. Roboticists are already exploring this. Some are designing robots inspired by plant growth, robots that don't have a fixed form, but grow and branch in response to their environment, exploring spaces the way roots explore soil. These plant-inspired robots might be useful for search and rescue, for exploring difficult terrain, for adapting to unpredictable situations. And philosophers studying consciousness might learn from plants too. If intelligence and responsive behavior can emerge without centralized processing, then maybe consciousness is more varied than we thought. Maybe it takes many forms, and our human form is just one possibility among many. This broadening of our perspective is valuable. For too long, we've put ourselves at the center of everything, judging all other life by how much it resembles us. But the universe doesn't revolve around human consciousness. Life has found countless ways to sense, respond, adapt, survive. Each way is valid on its own terms. Each form of intelligence is real, even if different from ours. Plants have been here far longer than us. They covered the continents hundreds of millions of years before the first animals walked on land. They created the oxygen we breathe, transformed the atmosphere, made Earth habitable for creatures like us. They've survived mass extinctions that eliminated most animal life. They've adapted to every climate, from Arctic tundra to desert to rainforest. They've done all this through their own form of intelligence. Not thinking, but sensing. Not planning in abstract terms, but responding to immediate and seasonal cues with exquisite precision. Not individual genius, but collective wisdom accumulated over evolutionary time and expressed through chemistry, growth, adaptation. We're only beginning to understand what plants can do. Every year brings new discoveries, new behaviors that surprise even the scientists who study them. Plants that can count, that can make choices, that can learn associations, that remember for weeks or months, that communicate in ways we never suspected. The green world is alive with signals we're just learning to detect. Chemical conversations flowing through the air and soil, electrical impulses racing through tissues, resource exchanges through underground networks, warning systems alerting neighbors to danger, cooperative behaviors that span species, competition and cooperation playing out in the silent drama of growth and survival. And through it all, plants persist, rooted, patient, responsive, gathering information from sunlight, from soil, from neighbors, from past experiences, processing that information through mechanisms we don't fully understand, making decisions in their own way, on their own. Timescales. Living intelligence expressed in green. As we near the end of this gentle exploration, let's come back to something simple: the experience of being around plants. There's research showing that being near plants makes people feel better. Hospital patients with windows overlooking gardens heal faster. Office workers with plants in their workspace report less stress. Even just looking at images of nature can calm the nervous system, lowering heart rate and blood pressure. Maybe part of this effect is knowing, on some level, that we're in the presence of life. Not simple life, not decorative life, but complex, responsive, intelligent life. Plants that are sensing and growing and responding to the world. Being around them connects us to something larger, something older, something that was here long before us and will be here long after. There's a kind of comfort in that, in the quiet patience of plants, in their steady growth, in the way they respond to each challenge without panic or complaint. Just adjustment, adaptation, continuation. Maybe that's what we can learn from them. Not just facts about photoreceptors and mycorrhizal networks, but a way of being. Rooted but flexible. Responsive but patient. Connected to others, but fundamentally whole in ourselves. Plants can't run from danger, so they stand and adapt. They can't fight with teeth or claws, so they fight with chemistry. They can't talk, so they signal in scents and underground threads. They take what they have, the tools they were given, and they make it work. And they've been doing this for hundreds of millions of years, longer than any animal lineage, longer than any creature with a brain. They were here before us, transforming the atmosphere, creating the oxygen we breathe, making the world habitable for creatures like us. They've been the foundation of terrestrial life since the beginning. Maybe intelligence isn't about being fast or mobile or loud. Maybe it's about being effective, about solving problems, about surviving and thriving in a complex world. By that measure, plants are masters. So the next time you see a houseplant on a windowsill or walk past a tree in the park, take a moment. Look at it. Really look at it. Those leaves are tracking the sun. Those roots are searching for water and nutrients. That whole organism is processing information from its environment, making decisions, adjusting and adapting and growing. It's not just alive, it's aware in its own way. It's part of the great web of life, connected to other plants, to fungi, to bacteria, to the soil and the air and the water. It's an individual and a member of a community. It's ancient and modern, shaped by millions of years of evolution and responding to this moment, right now. There's something profound in that, something worth paying attention to, something worth respecting. And maybe, if we can learn to see plants this way, we can learn to see everything differently. To look for intelligence, not just in things that think like us, but in all the different forms it takes. To appreciate the many ways that life finds to be aware, to respond, to persist. Because in the end, that's what intelligence is. Not thinking, not consciousness necessarily, but engagement with the world, information flowing in, processed, used to guide action, challenges met with creativity, problems solved with the tools available. Plants do that. They've always done that. We're just finally starting to notice. So, let your eyes grow heavy now. Let your breathing slow. You've wandered through a forest of ideas tonight, through underground networks and chemical signals, through memories held in leaves and decisions made without minds. You've met plants that learn and listen and talk to each other in languages older than words. And maybe, as you drift towards sleep, you can carry with you this small, strange comfort, that the world is more alive than we knew, that intelligence blooms in unexpected places, that awareness might be woven into the fabric of life itself, expressed in 10,000 different ways by 10,000 different forms. The plant on your windowsill is sensing the light even now, adjusting, responding, quietly being. The tree outside is connected to other trees through threads in the earth, sharing and signaling. Part of a community you can't see, but that's there, always there. You're not alone in being aware. The whole world is aware with you, in its own ways. The green world, ancient and patient, watching and responding and growing, always growing, toward light, toward life, toward tomorrow. Rest now. The plants will keep growing while you sleep. They'll keep learning, keep adapting, keep reaching toward the sun. They've been doing it for so long, long before we arrived, and they'll keep doing it long after we're gone. There's something comforting in that constancy, in that quiet persistence. You have done enough for today. You've learned and wondered and opened your mind to possibilities you might not have considered before. That's enough. More than enough. Now it's time to let go, to sink into stillness, to drift like a seed on the wind, gentle and light and free. Close your eyes. Feel the weight of your body supported, held, safe. Breathe slowly, deeply, easily, and know that somewhere, everywhere, plants are breathing too, in their own way, taking in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, the breath they share with us, the ancient exchange that makes all life possible. We're partners in this, part of the same system, the same web, the same beautiful, complicated, intelligent dance of life on Earth. Sleep well, dream of green things growing, and when you wake, maybe you'll see the world a little differently, with softer eyes and wider wonder, with respect for the quiet intelligence all around us, in every leaf and root and stem. From the Sleepy Library, good night.